The darkness inside the room was absolute, broken only by the faint, gray promise of the horizon pressing against the paper screen. Kenji sat on the floor, legs crossed, hands resting flat against his knees. He did not move. He did not breathe with any urgency. Outside, the world was still cold, but within the confines of the paper walls, the day had already begun. He watched the light bleed through the fibers of the screen, a slow migration of pale white turning into soft gold. He did not rise to meet the sun. He sat in the center of the silence and mapped out the hours ahead. First, the courtyard stones. Then, the whetstone against the steel. Finally, the scrolls. He saw each movement in his mind with the clarity of a finished painting. He visualized the angle of his wrist, the tension in his shoulder, and the exact weight of the blade in his palm. He did not rush the process. He allowed the morning to arrive at its own pace, building his focus layer by layer. Every task was already complete in his mind before he had even stood up to begin the work. The light grew stronger, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, but Kenji remained anchored, a single point of absolute stillness in a world beginning to wake. Kenji rose. The transition from stillness to motion was seamless, devoid of any wasted effort. He reached for the thin blanket. He folded it once, aligning the edges with absolute precision, then repeated the motion until it formed a perfect rectangle. He placed the fabric aside. He turned his attention to the straw mat beneath him. With the flat of his palms, he pressed outward, smoothing the surface in long, deliberate strokes to eliminate every crease and wrinkle. He worked from the center toward the perimeter, ensuring not a single fiber remained out of place. This was not a chore. It was the first act of the day. He stood back to survey the floor. The space was vacant. The space was orderly. By removing the physical mess, he cleared the internal pathways of his own mind. He did not leave a single trace of his presence behind. He checked the corners of the room one final time, confirming that the environment was as sharp and focused as his intent. With the room restored to total emptiness, he reached for the door handle. He was ready to step into the world outside. He slid the door open. The morning air hit him instantly, sharp and biting against his skin. He did not flinch. He stepped onto the stones, the cold grounding him in the present moment. He took his position in the center of the yard, feet spaced wide, weight evenly distributed. He began. His blade moved in a slow, sweeping arc, cutting through the stillness. He did not rush the extension. He followed the path of the steel with his eyes, watching the way it sliced the morning mist. He inhaled as he drew back, exhaled as he thrust forward. Each movement was a mirror of the last, measured and deliberate. The air felt heavy, offering resistance against his arms, but he pushed through it with steady, unwavering strength. 20 minutes passed in a blur of controlled motion. His breath remained deep, steady, and rhythmic, never hitching even as the intensity of the forms increased. He felt the heat rising in his shoulders and thighs, a slow burn that signaled his body was ready. He executed the final strike, held the position for a heartbeat, and then smoothly returned the blade to his side. He stood perfectly still, listening to the quiet of the yard, his pulse calm and his focus absolute. He was ready for the haul. Kenji turned away from the yard. He walked toward the training hall, his footsteps silent on the packed earth. The hall stood ahead, a structure of dark wood and deep shadows, smelling of aged timber and floor wax. He stopped at the entrance, placing his hand on the heavy sliding door. He took one final, deep breath, pulling the cool air into his lungs and letting it settle his core. He slid the door open. The interior was vast. The light filtered through high screens and long, dusty shafts. He stepped onto the polished wooden floor, his feet finding the familiar, smooth grain. He walked to the center of the room, the space echoing with the absence of sound. He reached for the wooden sword resting on the rack. He gripped the handle, feeling the weight and balance of the weapon in his palm. He moved to his mark, positioned himself, and stared at the target point on the far wall. This was the movement that had eluded him for weeks. He adjusted his stance, narrowed his focus, and tightened his grip. The hall seemed to shrink around him, leaving only the distance between his blade and the target. He was ready to begin the trial. Kenji moved. He shifted his weight forward, swinging the wooden sword in a tight, precise arc, meant to snap at the apex. The tip of the blade missed the mark by a fraction, the wood grazing the wall with a dull, hollow thud. He did not pause. He pulled the blade back, His muscles coiled and swung again. The momentum failed him. The sword slipped from his fingers, clattering loudly against the polished floor. The sound echoed into the rafters, dying away into a heavy, suffocating silence. He stood frozen for a moment, his chest heaving, listening to the stillness of the hall. He walked to the center, retrieved the weapon, and returned to his starting position. He took a breath, reset his feet, and launched into the strike once more. The arc was cleaner this time, but as the sword reached the critical point of extension, his wrist buckled. The wood struck the ground again, bouncing once before coming to a complete rest. The silence returned, deeper and more persistent than before. He stared at the floor, the wood lying stark against the dark grain. He did not move. He did not exhale. The weight of the repeated failure pressed against him, filling every corner of the hall. Kenji did not reach for the wood immediately. He let his arms hang at his sides, loosening the tension in his shoulders. He looked down at his hands. He flexed his fingers, checking the tension in the tendons, and then bent to retrieve the sword. He did not grip it with force this time. He held the handle lightly, feeling the center of gravity, testing the balance against the resistance of the air. He walked back to his starting point, but he did not rush into the motion. He stopped and closed his eyes. He visualized the path of the swing, the exact rotation of his wrist, and the precise moment of extension. He adjusted his lead foot, shifting his weight by a single inch until his stance felt anchored to the floorboards. He opened his eyes, but his gaze did not dart toward the target. He kept his vision soft, taking in the entire space of the hall. He felt the air move against his face. He felt the steady rhythm of his heart slowing down. He brought the sword up, aligning it with his center line, and held it there. Every muscle was now a component of a single, unified machine. He was no longer fighting the strike. He was becoming it. Kenji initiated the movement. It began not in his arms, but deep in his core, a silent surge of energy traveling upward through his spine. He swung. The wooden blade cut through the air with a clean, sharp hiss, lacking the hesitation of his previous failures. Time seemed to compress into the singular arc of the weapon. His wrist stayed locked, his shoulder remained fluid, and his eyes stayed fixed on the target point. There was no doubt in the path of the arc. As the wood reached full extension, the tip connected with the exact center of the mark. A sharp, resonant crack echoed through the hall, vibrating through the handle and into his bones. It was the sound of total alignment. Kenji did not pull away. He held the position, feeling the vibration dissipate into the floorboards. He exhaled, a long, steady stream of air that carried away the weeks of doubt. The wooden sword felt like an extension of his own arm, perfectly balanced and silent. He relaxed his grip, letting his shoulders drop, and stepped back. He looked at the mark, then at his hands, watching the steady pulse of his own blood. The struggle was gone. In its place was the cold, hard clarity of success. The training hall was behind him. Kenji walked to the garden pond, his movements slow and deliberate, shedding the residual energy of the morning. He sat on the edge of the stone path, his back straight, and lowered his gaze to the water. Beneath the surface, orange and white koi drifted in lazy, circular patterns. He watched them move. He did not think about the strike or the morning's success. He simply existed in the quiet. The wind brushed the water, creating ripples that distorted the reflection of the clouds. He counted the breaths between the wind gusts. A bell chimed from the gate, signaling the merchant. The man was well past the agreed hour. Kenji did not check the sun. He did not stand up in annoyance. He remained by the pond for 3 more heartbeats, finishing his observation of the fish before he rose to his feet. He walked to the gate with the same measured stride he used for his sword forms. He arrived at the entrance, stopped, and stood perfectly still. He was ready. Time had not been lost. It had been held in reserve, and now he was prepared to spend it with the focus of a blade coming home to its sheath. The day receded. Kenji sat in the dimming light, consuming a bowl of steamed rice and bitter greens. Each bite was slow, rhythmic, and purposeful. He chewed until the food was gone, respecting the fuel that would sustain his strength for tomorrow. Once the bowl was cleared and washed, he moved to his small desk. He pulled out his logbook, the paper worn smooth at the edges. He dipped his brush into the ink and turned to the final entry. He reviewed the morning's drills, the afternoon's stillness, and the evening's study. He calculated the metrics of his training with the same precision he applied to his sword. His speed had increased by 1%, a single digit on a page, but he felt the weight of it in his hands. It was not a grand victory, but it was absolute. He watched the ink dry, its dark line crisp against the grain of the paper. This was the harvest of his discipline. He closed the book, his movements precise and final. The room was quiet. He felt the tension leave his muscles, replaced by the steady, heavy calm of a day fully conquered. He had not missed a single beat. The routine held, and in that consistency, he found the bedrock of his future. He extinguished the candle, the room falling into a deep, velvet shadow. Kenji moved to the center of the mat, his actions smooth and practiced, leaving no item out of place. He lay back, his body settling into the firm surface. The silence of the night was not empty. It was heavy with the echo of his choices. He watched the faint outline of the paper screen, dimly lit by the moon outside. Every breath was a measured count. He felt the physical weight of the day, the slight ache in his shoulders and the controlled rhythm of his heart. He knew that the man he would become in 5 years was not forged in the heat of battle, but here, in the absolute stillness of this moment, he closed his eyes. The world outside the house faded, leaving only the clarity of his own purpose. He did not drift into sleep immediately. He held the image of his goal, letting it anchor his mind as he allowed the exhaustion to take him. He was a stone being shaped by the patient, constant pressure of his own routine. Tomorrow would be another cycle of precision. Tonight, he was ready. He let his muscles go limp, his mind clear, and drifted into the quiet, disciplined dark.